Greetings, everyone. Let me take a moment here to go on the Instagram, let the people know that we're going live, and then we can do it there as well. Let's create a live. Yeah, there we go. That's a good angle. So, once again, this week we're going to be trying out doing these on Instagram Live as well. So, if you see me looking back and forth like this, you'll know that I'm looking at Instagram. Hey, Instagram people, we're live right now. If you head over to our Facebook page, CommonTime Online, or one of our Facebook groups, CommonTime for Educators or CommonTime for Artists, you will see the link, the session link to our weekly Wisdom Wednesday webinar series, where today we're going to be digesting the CommonCore or the US curriculum and how CommonTime can work to support educators that are in that field. So, once again, my name is Michael Skillern. I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator here at CommonTime Online. And today, my goal is to educate you educators, give you a little background on the US curriculum for some of you that don't know about it, for some of you international teachers who are maybe new to the US, or some of you that are still digesting and unpacking these standards. Even as an American teacher, moving to my new school and actually having the opportunity to go back through a lot of these standards. And some of you are already thinking, Common Time is a performing arts platform or an arts platform. We're already talking about Common Core. Yes, Common Core is only for math and language arts, but the vast majority of the US states have adopted the National Core Art Standards, which they use for those classes, or they have revised them and are using something very, very similar. So we're going to be talking about that today, what those are, what that is, and how CommonTime can support you educators that are teaching that. CommonTime, if you're wondering, is an all-inclusive arts platform, your digital home for the arts, where our goals are to empower artists, engage learners, and expand arts outreach through live, virtual, engaging sessions just like this. Just like this, we want to empower learners by giving them access to our growing list of over 50 worldwide teaching artists that are ready to beam into your homes, into your schools, onto your devices to help you create the art that you want to create today on demand. You can book them, schedule them, chat with them, see their credentials and their backgrounds right here at CommonTime.online. We want to empower the artists by giving them a platform where they can host ticketed events, where they can host educational materials, where they can teach lessons, give master classes, give recitals at an availability that they choose, and most importantly, for an artist like myself, for a price that they choose. And likewise, we want to help arts organizations expand their outreach by they can host their live streamed content to our built-in audience of individuals, educators, and artists who you already know love the arts. They're just waiting for you to host your content on Common Time. Speaking of arts organizations, did you know that on November 13th, the oldest youth orchestra in the United States, the Portland Youth Philharmonic, will be hosting their season 98 Together Again season opening concert right here live on CommonTime.online. You just head up to the Arts Organizations tab right there at the top, find the Portland Youth Philharmonic, and you can buy tickets. And you need to get them because that date, November 13th, is coming up. For more details on that, head to CommonTime.online or find us on any of the social media sites at CommonTime Online. Okay, let's get down to it. The Common Core, I use that in the title because that's honestly kind of a clickbaity title, but when you're in the international teaching circuit, that word comes up a lot. But many people don't know that the Common Core only applies to math and language arts subjects, English language arts, And I think about 46 or 47 states in the US out of 50 have adopted these. Now, even though the arts are listed as subjects, they do not have the same standards requirements under the Common Core. A lot of states use the national core art standards, and some states have their own art standards, but they are all really, really similar. And we're going to talk about some ways. We're going to digest that, break down what they are, and then talk about some ways that CommonTime can actually support you in delivering this curriculum. So let's start with my favorite subject, music. The music section of the National Core Art Standards, where I actually currently am using the Colorado standards, which are a revised version of the National Core Art Standards, but once again, very similar to the National Core Art Standards. And they're very similar to whatever set of standards you might see in your classroom if you are teaching an American system school. And they're broken down into 4 categories. The first one is performing music. Ideally, the standards deal with singing alone and with others if you're at the primary level, or if you're teaching band, it could be playing alone or with others at a level 1 level if you're teaching 6th grade band, for example. The second category is the theory of music, which mostly has to do with notation. Reading music, knowing about tempo, knowing about form, things like that. The third section is creating music, which has to deal with teaching improvisation and also music composition. And then the last one is the aesthetic valuation of music, which is being able to critique music, being able to receive and deliver peer and self and teacher directed feedback, and also being able to know that different cultures use music differently and music changes as you go across different cultures. Oops. There we go. I lost my Instagram camera there. Let me set it back up. Perfect. So now that we've broken those down, let's look at how CommonTime can help you teach these 4 standard areas by bringing in a guest artist on our platform. So first things first is performing music. Now, we have several, more than several, like what's beyond several, musicians on CommonTime that are specialized in different instruments that are ready to come in, give master classes, give private lessons, a lending ear, anything you need for your music programs to make sure that they are performing to their highest level. First off, let's start with voice. If you want, especially your primary teachers, if you want to get your students singing correctly with the proper technique and making sure that they are performing up to the standard that you know that they can achieve, whether it's alone or with others, you need to bring in Joshua Alexander. He is a working singer, composer, and choral director out of Georgia in the United States. And he has over 5 years of experience, not only teaching choir in public schools, not only teaching individual voice and piano lessons, not only singing with the Savannah Philharmonic's choir, and not only composing for voice as well as chamber instruments, but he's got 5 years of experience just being an all-around great guy. This is a high-quality, world-class, vetted vocal artist that can come in and give your students a class on vocal technique. He can show them exercises. He is also a solfege expert. So when it comes to teaching like conversational solfege and getting the students singing through that, he is totally up and ready for that. Techniques, warming up, teaching solfege, just the general physical mechanics of singing. I read an article that was saying that if we're not teaching our younger students, especially proper singing technique, we're really putting them at a disservice. So if singing is part of the performing set of standards for your music class, you've got to get a singer like Joshua Alexander out there to work with your students. Some of the little substandards under that set are things like selecting and preparing work for a presentation, getting ready for a concert. Some of the other things you might see is performing Singing at the primary level. It could even be singing simple melodies. It could be using call and response. All sorts of things like that are kind of tied in to the Colorado curriculum. And if you give me a moment here, I can actually give you some more details about those Colorado music standards and kind of what is inside the performance part. And once again, this is going to be very similar to the standards from other states or the National Core Art Standards. Okay, and they also, some people call performing music the expression of music. But one, it says here, use correct vocal or instrumental technique when singing and playing instruments. So if you're teaching that, you've got to get a choir guy in there to make sure you're singing. Okay. Going back to our list of artists, if you have students playing guitar or ukulele and you want to make sure that they're playing with the correct technique that's mentioned in that standard, if you want to make sure that they are knowing how to refine and accept feedback on their performance, if you want to make sure that they are understanding how to perform different melodic, rhythmic, or harmonic phrases, these are all parts of that performing music or expression of music little subset of standards there. You want to bring in Carrie Lowe. She is a delightful guitar player from Hong Kong that specializes in classical guitar, but also she's bringing your students a different perspective. What are their ideas on performing in Hong Kong? What are the ideas of their ideas about melody that are coming from East Asian music like that? You know, what are the different ideas of beauty when you're playing in that culture? What does playing something well mean when you're coming from that? She can give your students not only the guitar technique and information and vocabulary and knowledge that they need to meet these standards, but she can also present them from a different context that can help your students construct meaning by putting a face, a name, and a real live engaging experience when they're mastering some of these objectives. We talked about voice, we talked about guitar. Let's talk about percussion. I'll present that to you from two sides. We have got drum set international touring artist Jordan Manley, who has played with jazz bands, rock bands, pop bands, funk bands. He currently has a really cool duo with this bass player where I guess they're literally playing drum and bass, and he can give you yet another perspective on what it means to perform. When we go down into some of the older ages, like maybe eighth grade, they have a little bit more specific substandards in the performance that little subset, like playing with correct technique and consistent tone quality, balance with an ensemble, things like that. When it comes to playing with an ensemble, there's no one better than him. And also, it says here the ability to refine and develop criteria for rehearsal, getting ready for a performance. He has gotten ready for so many performances, and he can give your students the perspective of preparing for a performance from the touring perspective. What if your students had to sing their Christmas concert every night for 3 months? You know, how does that change their performance? How does that inform what they're going to do? If we scroll down here into some of the older groups here, you get standards like performing rhythms correctly, locking down those drum rhythms, giving your students a new perspective on rhythm from his perspective, and also using expressive qualities. I feel like drummers, especially since their art is so visual, they can really impart a lot of wisdom into, if we're singing, Lac Le Monde, which is kind of a somber song, or maybe we're playing Orff percussion instruments along to row, row, row your boat, which could be a happy song. How can we visually impart some of that expression into our music? And on the classical side, we've got another gentleman by the name of Quentin Mallet, who is an orchestral and classical percussionist, also out of the US, who has been teaching from babies to adults for the past 10 years. And he can give your students, especially your percussion students, a lot of the TLC that they need to make sure that they're meeting these standards. And when it comes to woodwinds, we have Roddy, a clarinet specialist. Sydney, a flute specialist, Cassandra, a bassoon specialist. We have both Andrew Sally and Brett Copeland, who are brass specialists, Michaela Tasselek, who is a string specialist, Diane Yu, or even Jimmy Chang, who are both classical pianists. And we even have some world music artists like Farzine, who plays the Comanche and the oud, which are both Arabic regional string instruments. And also we have Pranoy Chatterjee, who was a tabla master from Calcutta, India. When you bring in artists like this to get their perspective on performance, to get them to actually perform to your students, to get them to impart wisdom on your students into how different cultures perceive melody, how different cultures or different instruments even perceive rhythm, you're really, really doing your students a benefit. I feel that with these substandards, there's so much to cover under all those standards that when it comes to teaching melody, rhythm, teaching harmony, teaching how to critique yourself, how to rehearse, how to practice, you've got to put landmark experiences tied to these different learning objectives so that your students get the most out of it. And CommonTime helps you support your students by supporting you with these guest artists. Next, let's talk about the theory of music. I kind of want to combine that with the creation of music. So the theory of music is all about analyzing music, and the National Core Art Standards, I think, would refer to this as responding. The National Core Art Standards would refer to this as responding, but I'm going to connect that with the creation part. And creation also exists in the National Core Art Standards. I love bringing composers into my class because not only can they workshop through a piece of music that they're written or help your students learn to write their own music, but when they're doing these types of sessions like that, not only are your students learning more about notation, more about signs and symbols they didn't know, more about how to actually use those signs and symbols in context, but the composers do a really good job of teaching the creation aspect of music while also making sure that their theory is good, that their reading is good, that their knowledge of form is good. What better way to introduce form to your class than by have a composer come in, sit with them, and take them through a piece of music, outlining all the different forms, outlining how those forms are used, especially when you're in upper primary, maybe even secondary classes. Bringing in a composer is invaluable when teaching both creation and music theory. Some of the composers that we have on the CommonTime roster right now that we would love to come in as a guest artist in your class to teach them how they can create music and analyze theory are Michael Standard. He comes from the US and he has a long history with music composition, having composed for bands, orchestras, chamber ensembles, and having his music played around the world. Having him come in, and he's a self-publisher, so having him come in and teach your students how these symbols that they see, these symbols that they learn about can be used to create art, and taking them through compositional exercises where they leave class that day with a piece of music that they've written in Western notation, it is invaluable. I like the way I pronounce that. Invaluable. I sound like kind of like a villain. Other composers that we have on the platform are Douglas Hein. The reason I really like him is because he's published a lot of work for guitar. So at least in some of the schools that I've taught at and the one where I'm currently teaching classroom guitar is really, really popular because it grabs creating art. So when you have an artist that has such a clear vision on how they go through their creative process, I think that it's important to give your students an actual example of a creative process. Oftentimes I read a survey that said something crazy. Like, I don't want to misquote the statistic, but it was a very, very high number of teachers teach the way that they were taught. A very high number of teachers teach the way that they were taught. It's important that, especially when you're teaching something like creative thinking, that you give your students the opportunity to see examples of creative thinking from different people, not just the way you teach them. I knew a really, really great art teacher who would always start her units that would, of course, there would be some type of final product in mind. And she would usually start this with artist research, where they would research 5 or 6 artists that were creating art with the medium that they were going to be using for their final project. So then after that, and that was more like a criteria A type deal. Then after that, they would, and I'm speaking IB speak now. So that was more like a knowledge gainer. Then after that, they would start a process journal where they would start jotting down ideas, drawing things, sketching things out. And then after that, they would actually create the item. Then after that, they would reflect on it. But that process probably doesn't work for everyone. It really worked for this teacher and her students, but I would imagine that doesn't work for everyone. That's not the best way that everyone creates. So bringing in an artist like Ash Pearl, having her give insight into how she creates, then having her actually create a work of art with their students in real time on the CommonTime platform will give them another perspective on what the creative process is and help them find their own. Next, with the visual arts, is presenting, and that has to do with sharing artistic ideas, selecting work for a presentation, refining and practicing your art technique for a presentation, and using your art or a selection of works to kind of convey meaning and tell a story. And to help support you in that area, I would love for you to meet Tanesh Weber. You bring Tanesh into your classes. Now, she is kind of an abstract photographer, but the cool thing that I think with this curriculum is that she goes to exhibition all the time. So, this whole idea of selecting work for presentation and refining the technology she's using, the gear she's using to refine that presentation, and then trying to tell a story through a group of pieces of artwork is exactly what she's doing every day. And she can give your students from a real world perspective. I often talk about performance tasks where we're asking our students to take a role. Like, you're not a 5th grade art student with an iPad, you're a photographer. And we can give them a real life photographer's mindset on how she presents her artwork. What does it look like? The process of going to exhibition. How does she select photos? And I feel like a photographer is the best person to do that, because photographers they might see a bridge and take 500 photos of that bridge. How do you select them? What's the criteria for deciding what's good and what's not? Bringing in Tanesh will give your students an invaluable experience that ties a face, a name, and an engaging experience with that learning outcome. Then we talk about responding to visual art, which is about evaluating and gaining understanding about how art can convey meaning, how to see intent behind artwork, how to create criteria to determine whether or not artwork is good. And I think the best way to drive this home, in my opinion, especially when it comes to developing that criteria, I think that's one of the most important parts of this, is creating lifelong appreciators of the art and having them develop an opinion so that when they see art, they can be affected by it, whether for better or worse. And it's good to give your students a lot of different perspective as what good art means to different people and different cultures. And one person from the CommonTime platform who can help you do that is Janice Yintima. She specializes in making like encaustic paintings with beeswax. And there's a really deep cultural context to cultures that are close to bees, including her own, when she makes these works of art like this. And I think Janice is based in Belgium. Janice is based in Belgium, based on my memory. Now, my memory is not 100%, but let me check for you. I'll tell you. Yeah, she is based out in Brussels, Belgium, and she is giving her kind of cultural identity through these beeswax and caustics. But when you're looking at a type of art that's not your standard charcoal or watercolors like that, your definition of what's good kind of starts to change. And that's the type of wisdom that she can impart on her students. She can she can be interviewed by the students where they ask questions about this beeswax and they work to form opinions. And you can hear about her criteria that she uses to decide if her own artwork is good or how she feels about that. Now, the last part of the National Core Art Standards is connecting. And connecting has to do with connecting ideas from art with kind of personal value in other contexts, like social context, cultural context, things like that. And understanding that connection and that tie, that bridge between art and culture, and understanding that art imitates life is so important when you're teaching any of the art forms. And CommonTime can support you in this by giving you access to Kanchana, who is of Indian descent but is living out in Germany, and she creates Indian folk art in the style of Madhwabani and Mithila. And both of these styles of art are so deeply connected to who she is, who her parents are, who their parents were, her town, her neighborhood, and her culture. And they're so symbolic of Indian life that when she's going through with your students and helping them create this type of artwork for themselves, or showing them the artwork that she has that she can present to them, she can give them a real life, engaging experience that outlines how culture and art are so intertwined and connected. And you also are giving your students a chance to experience art from a different culture. Like, obviously, in whatever culture you're teaching, the local students there are going to have a connection to certain types of art. But in order to expand their minds into seeing that other cultures also connect to art in different ways is an invaluable thing that you can do. So, using those same set of standards, we'll talk about drama and theater and how Common Time can help support you educators that are delivering this curriculum. Starting off, just like we did last time, with creating, conceiving and developing artistic works that are new and ideas that are new. One of the best ways I would think, and now I'm no theater teacher, but I have been known to act sometimes. One of the best ways in the drama world that we can create new ideas that we can guarantee are new is through improvisation. And out in Slovakia, there is a gentleman by the name of Hong Chong who runs an improv theater called Funnylicious. Whenever I hear that word, I kind of picture whose line is it anyway for any Americans out there. And improv theater is one of the purest forms of creativity in the theater world. And this particular person runs a program where he does this with kids and adults and the people in his troupe all the time. You can bring him into your classes with the touch of your finger, on demand, from booking, scheduling to payment to hosting, right here on the Common Time platform, and have him go through some improv activities and scene creation and character creation to get your students thinking, creating, presenting brand new ideas and taking them from conception and thought to reality and presentation. And I think kind of driving home the creating part of the theater standards, that's a great way to do that is through bringing in Han Chong and his improvisation theater. When it comes to performing, I kind of had this idea that, you know, film and TV has a much different view on performing. And luckily, we have Jasmine Akakpo, who is a verified CommonTime artist who not only acts in TV and film, but also produces and directs and writes on TV and film as well. She's kind of a jack of all trades, master of all, because she's quite talented. And I was kind of conceiving these learning experiences where you give your students a short script, just a few lines even, and you have them pretend like they're auditioning for a movie, and you have her kind of explain how you can use the text to do this or to convey that emotion, or explain to them how you would read text from the point of view of someone who does film and TV, since most of our schools are going to be doing most of their performing on stage. You can have Jasmine critique their performances and give meaningful feedback with that director's eye. And I think since in school, part of our duty should be preparing students for that next level, having someone come in and look at them like a producer, like they're auditioning. When you're talking about those performance tasks and those roles our students are playing, that's another invaluable experience brought just to you by Common Time. And I want to connect that to the responding element. Since Jasmine's a writer, she can also go in depth into script and text with your students, maybe even the play that they're rehearsing for their spring play or a musical. And she can help your students understand how so much culture and social context and can lies in beneath the punctuation and the letters of these sentences in the text. And likewise, being a writer, she can help her students develop a criteria for if a script is good or not, or if a performance is good or not, based on her experience. When you're trying to teach these concepts, the best way is to give your students a performance task and assign them a role. So if they're not seventh graders, they're actors. Then when you are an actor, you got to give them access to someone who is like them, being an actor. We do that for you at Common Time Online. And next, I want to go back to Han Chong, our improvisation guy. When it comes to connecting and realizing that within artworks, within plays, within these monologues, within this text lies personal meaning and different types of context. Doing improvisation activities or seeing a presentation from an improv theater is a great way to digest this little subset of standards. Having your students create scenes based on their personal experience, based on things from their culture, based on things from another culture, based on different points in their life, based on their surroundings, based on a feeling, going through these different improvisation activities. Not only are your students getting something memorable, something enlightening, and something engaging, but they're also really hitting these different learning objectives in a real way. All of those artists I mentioned are available to come into your classes right now. Maybe not right now, depending on their available time, but you know what I mean. And the last portion of the National Core Art Standards is talking about dance. When you're looking at creating in dance, why not bring in someone who creates dances for a living, like Pascal Sengel out of Germany, available now on Common Time? He's a choreographer and improviser that's dancing all over the place. He can help your students improvise their movements, then take those movements and structure them in a way that resembles a rehearsed dance through his work as a choreographer. Imagine your students having a session with him, or maybe 3 sessions, and leaving at the end of that with a dance that they choreographed themselves. What better way to experience creation in the dance world than by working with a dance creator and then doing it yourself? When it comes to performing in our dance subject, we've got a wonderful dance artist named Hannah who specializes in storytelling through her dance, using her dance to tell a story, using the human body to portray different emotions or settings or ideas or cultures and feelings and moods and situations, helping your students listen to that music and really dissect, what are we showing here? What are we telling the audience through our movements? okay, we want to tell them this, but how can we achieve that with our body? What motions feel like that? When you're organizing and developing artistic ideas, which is one of the specific standards in this area, how can we portray this certain idea using our arm? How does the body move to tell that story? When you're working to generate or conceptualize or come up with these different ideas, she can help your students do that through her mindset and storytelling. When it comes to responding, we've got yet another dance artist named Menon, and she has a really interesting perspective when it comes to creating criteria to evaluate work, or learning how to interpret intent and meaning behind different dances. As that she's also studied at the Royal Ballet of Antwerp in Europe, but then she's also studied at the Alvin Ailey School in New York. So those are two completely different ideologies and methods of dancing ballet, but she's almost lived two lives. The way that she critiques dance has had to have changed going through those different settings. The what beauty in dance means to her must have changed going through that. And she can come to your students, show them examples from both sides of her education, and show them how she critiques dance and how the way she sees dance has changed. And lastly, I love repeating artists. I want to bring in Pascal for the connecting portion of this curriculum. Synthesizing and relating knowledge of from art to personal experience and knowing that it has cultural context. Pascal uses improvised dance to bring ideas and context in different cultures to life. He can allow your students to take their personal context, like their lives or what they're wearing or their surroundings or the city they're in or the setting or the time of day, and help them improvise and then choreograph that into succinct dance works where their students will know from the beginning that they're creating this based on personal context and that other people do that too. So just to recap, we kind of went through, we're not kind of, we did go through some of the different US mindsets when it comes to curricula for teaching the arts, whether that be visual, theater, dance, or music. We kind of broke down some of those areas which are kind of hovering around performing or presenting, creating, this idea of responding to music or responding to other arts, which is kind of, you know, national core art standards for evaluating and analyzing an art. Colorado, they call it the theory, and also the connecting to art, or Colorado called it the aesthetic evaluation of music. Your state or wherever your admins are from, they call it something different, but it has to do with connecting art to yourself, to society, to other people, to different cultures. And when you are teaching these ideas, these concepts, these standards, one of your best resources is the people that are doing that work. So consider, why not? Come to CommonTime online. Find one of our amazing musicians, actors, improvisers, dancers, painters, photographers, architects, and have them come in and give your students a face, a name, a personal, engaging, enlightening experience to help you better teach the CommonCore, or we'll call them, that's code word for National Core Art Standards, or whatever branch of the US standards you're teaching. Thank you so much for coming in and listening to me tell you about how we here at CommonTime are ready to support you educators in whatever you're doing. And remember, on November 13th, the oldest youth orchestra in the US, the Portland Youth Philharmonic, is presenting Together Again, their season 98 opening concert, where they're going to be playing music like Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis and symphonies of wind instruments by Stravinsky, as well as some brand new works that they had commissioned through their Young Orchestra Commissioning Initiative. pieces by Reynaldo Moya and Taishu Shin and Nicole Buetti. Head over to CommonTime.online to the Arts Organizations tab and get those tickets now. As always, I can be reached at Michael at CommonTime.online. You can find us on socials, on Facebook, Common Time Online, and also our interactive groups, Common Time for Artists and Common Time for Educators. You can find us on Instagram at CommonTime.online, same name on LinkedIn. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you to all of our Instagram viewers and all of our Common Time live stream viewers. Maybe drop in, leave a comment, send me an email. How can we better support and lift up our educators and bring them into our Common Time community? Once again, this is another Wednesday where we're doing Wisdom Wednesday. We're going to impart some wisdom and try to help lift you up. Thank you for watching. See you soon.